If you are not familiar with the Digital Poverty Alliance, my name is Elizabeth and I'm the Chief Executive over here. The DPA is a charitable coalition, so we work with government, whether that's national or local. We work with businesses, big and small, and we work with the community sector, education institutions, health trusts, and all types of organisations who share a common goal of ending digital poverty once and for all in the UK. We do this as an organisation through advocacy, we do it through delivery, and a big part of what we do is raising awareness and stimulating conversations about how digital poverty affects different people in different ways, and more importantly, stimulating some ideas for innovation and solutions around this. I'm delighted that today we're joined by Alyson, and we're going to be looking at empowering students and staff. Digital inclusion and blended learning in higher education is our topic. So thinking about that impact in the university sector and all around HE. Alyson, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks for having me. Just to introduce myself, I'm Alyson Hwang. I work for Policy Connect, which is a cross-party think tank based in London. And I sit within our education and skills team as a senior researcher overlooking our higher education policy research. And over the past year, I've authored this report on digitally enhanced blended learning, which we're going to be talking about today. And this was on behalf of the Higher Education Commission, which is kind of an independent body made up of sector leaders like vice chancellors and digital transformation leads. And what Policy Connect does is we provide secretariat and research support for these groups. And so, we had steering group members from JISC, ACCA Global, UCISA, NHS England, Royal Academy of Engineering, and so on and so forth. But importantly, this report marks the Commission's 10th inquiry into higher education policy and focuses on how universities use blended learning and, importantly, tech to enhance student and staff experiences.
Amazing. It sounds like a real powerhouse of stakeholders there as well, who have been feeding in to so much thinking and solutions-driven ideas as well. Just before we dive into all of that, we've got a fantastic number of people who are joining this call. We'd love to know who you are. Do use the chat. Tell us who you are, whereabouts in the country or indeed the world you happen to be, what organisation you represent. And do remember at the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A function. If you have any questions throughout, pop them in there. And then as we come to the end of the session, we will take as many of those questions as we have time for. Let's kick off then, Alyson, and just sort of let's set the scene. How has digital inclusion, really seeking to make sure that everyone can benefit, reshaped the landscape of higher education in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question to start because in the grand scheme of things, right, I think digital inclusion is quite a recent and new phenomenon. And that's kind of crazy to think about because it's been at the forefront of my mind and, of course, your mind, Elizabeth. But I think when it became embedded into our everyday lives and it became ubiquitous, and by it, I mean tech, it's become a relevant and a sector-wide problem to address for the higher education sector. And with COVID and the national lockdowns, obviously this trend just accelerated, where many teaching and learning materials were translated onto digital domains with little preparation. And for about, I would say, 2 years, students were expected very suddenly to do all the things they do at school and on campus, such as engage with peers, make friends, build communities, and develop who they are as people. All of this was done and facilitated online. So it really became who is unable to do this and how do we support them to get to that point. So the Office for Students, which is the sector's regulator, defines a digitally excluded student as one that is lacking access to one or more of the core kind of items or components to digital infrastructure. So we commonly think of maybe hardware, software, internet connectivity. Do you have access to support and repair? Do you have an instructor who can lead you and steer you in the right direction and an appropriate study space to really engage with those tools? Now, at this point in the conversation, the Commission went a step further to state that digital poverty also includes a lot more nuanced elements, right? And we're thinking about the ability to navigate or engage digital tools and solutions for the first time, even if you didn't know about them. Or maybe this is about the level of general confidence that a student has when using technology. And something that isn't mentioned a lot, but is equally and becoming more important is low awareness of internet safety and design. And we know with emerging technologies like AI, this is becoming, and the spread of misinformation, this is becoming such a huge problem. So, from the research that took place over this year, we come to understand that, luckily the sector is already thinking of digital inclusion in layers, in complex layers, and is keen to address challenges for students and staff. I think the main goal is, what does digital inclusion look like across the board nationally, regardless of context, and how do we aim for that together?
Yes, and of course it's always easier to point out what exclusion looks like, but it's much harder to actually define what that truly inclusive digital space is going to mean, both in terms of the kit and the connectivity and the support, but also the skills, as you say, the support, the platforms once they're there, whether they meet everybody's needs. And I guess in thinking about blended learning, that becomes incredibly important. What do you think the main advantages of blended learning over traditional learning methods are, particularly when you're looking to foster that truly inclusive learning environment?
I think, to me, the biggest benefit of blended learning is the actual ownership of your learning experience. You really get to participate in choosing when and where you engage with your course material. Things that used to be barriers, like commuting expenses or timetabling issues, can be readily addressed through the flexibility that blended learning offers. And in this report, I mentioned in the title earlier that we talk about digitally enhanced blended learning. So this prefix of digitally enhanced comes from the idea that we want to optimize the structures and systems already in place so that all students and staff can really leverage the benefits of technology throughout their time at university. And this obviously centers around having equitable access to that technology and the accessibility of the products and services we use. And in the university, in the HE sector, I think we can speak about this in more granular terms. It's critical to acknowledge that digital poverty and exclusion obviously intersect with other forms of marginalization and disadvantage, which leads to further inequalities among students. I mean, simply put, like, for example, how many AI programs are behind paywalls? And how many students are really able to benefit from those really new, emerging, and exciting tech? And I think of this written submission by the Teesside University, who shared some of their data with us, as citing that Black, African Caribbean, Indian, and Pakistani students report that they lack access to suitable devices and are often have issues with mobile data costs at a higher rate than the overall survey data, and certainly more than their peers. And I think this is why it's important to approach this from multiple levels, but with a cohesive and consistent strategy to kind of overlook the entire initiative so that we can keep someone accountable for implementing this change. But yeah, going back to the advantage, I would say definitely the autonomy you're given is a huge one.
And therefore, having that autonomy taken away from you, if you don't have that access, is evidently going to just put you in an even worse position against your peers, as they are gaining this much more immersive learning experience, whereas you're really even struggling with just the basics of being able to even access the VLE. So evidently you've talked a little bit in your intro about the Higher Education Commission and some of the stakeholders who sit within that. What were some of the key findings that came out of the report on digitally enhanced blended learning?
Right. And for the sake of this webinar, I just want to focus on talking about equity and access to tech. I mean, this is a very chunky report, as I was saying to Elizabeth earlier. It's very long. I recommend everyone gives it a read. But I think the key takeaway from this is ensuring that we level the playing field for students and staff, right? And so a little bit about what I said earlier of having multiple layers of approaches. There must be both a top-down and bottom-up approach to tackling some of the root causes of digital poverty. And this comes from the top-down because there needs to be accountability and leadership to drive change, but also to put this as an institutional-wide kind of priority to solve. But bottom up also because you need to utilize the networks and communities already set in place to support students and staff. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. There are some fantastic initiatives that have already been implemented that would just benefit so much from being scaled up or having more participants. And so we really talk about working with student unions, right? A trusted information source of information for students to ensure that anyone struggling with their digital navigation can go to someone for help and know where to go, right? Providing guidance, but also signposting students to get relevant support. And oftentimes digital support is framed around this idea of providing technical support. So actually getting onto installing softwares and things like that. But there can be a support system that goes beyond this, right? Pinpointing students to student deals for mobile data contracts, or for eligible students, social tariffs and internet vouchers. Signposting students to, financial support such as the hardship fund, which universities all have their own iteration of, which can help students with maintenance costs, key costs like device and software maintenance. And universities have started to do this. I remember, in the University of South Wales, they have this brilliant digital mentoring program, right? Which they pair up a digital mentor with oncoming students during the pre-arrival and induction process to really help them and ease the transition from school to university, to say, these are the digital skills that are going to be expected of you, but here's also the softwares that you're, and the platforms that you're being expected to use. And I think there are other initiatives taking place with the same goal of trying to make it easier for students so that they feel empowered to really engage with the tools that they have access to. And, most importantly, circling back to earlier, talking about digital inclusion being this sector-wide issue, not just a single university issue. There's a great willingness across the sector to collaborate and enable solutions together, a lot more than other industries. The HG sector is very special in that regard, to find sustainable and effective approaches to push forth on this agenda. And, Freddie Quek, who I'm sure you know, Elizabeth, but for those who don't, is the chair of the British Computing Society's Digital Divide Specialist Group. And he added this brilliant statement to the report section on equitable access to tech. Now, I just have it here, and it reads that digital inclusion is a multidimensional and complex issue, intertwined with many other personal and social issues, such as financial poverty, deprivation, and social inequalities. So therefore, it should not be treated as a separate issue or thought of as a problem to be solved by a single entity. And we very much echo that throughout the report, right? We need to join up thinking and understand that to scale up initiatives nationally is really the way to benefit a large number of students and staff at once. And to highlight some of the really great work that's going on, Professor Nawaz of Staffordshire University actually launched a digital inclusion manifesto for his campus, with the aim of encouraging other institutions and leaders to do the same. And I think I'm starting to see a lot of digital strategies emerge in different contexts, right? It takes one to start a chain, and we all know that this will kind of remain a priority for many institutions in the next coming years. I need to add that on top of this, right, universities are not the only responsible body for implementing change. I think I wanted to note that on average, student broadband deals are £17 more expensive than social tariff offerings, right? Considering the uptake of social tariffs being so low, we could do more to help eligible students from low-income households to get the maintenance support they need. And the report sort of calls on Ofcom to work with providers in establishing further discounted broadband deals or mobile data costs for students in higher education, many of whom are responsible for managing maintenance costs. And because of the current maintenance loan system, Some are going into debt to access their course material. And this is just not a pretty picture to paint, I think. And there is a precedence for this kind of initiative in other contexts. For example, in South Africa, we have the University of Witwatersrand, who kind of contracted with their local telecom providers to provide 30 gigabytes of mobile data for free at no cost to students during COVID and national lockdowns. And now the scheme has evolved to use a bill-back system to provide reduced rates for students and staff. And 30 gigabytes is plenty to access learning materials on VLE platforms, but also to chat to your cohort. So these are just some of the great ways that people have been starting to approach this.
It's fantastic to hear about these sort of good examples as well, and how these good examples spread out. As you say, this isn't just a problem for universities. It's not just a problem for IT departments in universities. This is something that really does need this holistic approach where so many different partners come through. Mm-hmm. But actually starting to see some of that, the commitments, whether they're in the UK, whether they're abroad, whether it's that digital inclusion manifesto, that's got to be inspiring for people, because it is much harder to work from a blank canvas sometimes. Do you have specific case studies almost of individuals and people where blended learning has really improved outcomes for students, whether they're from minority or non-minority backgrounds?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest joys of participating in this research project, was actually meeting the students and talking to them. For a little bit of context, I was doing my postgraduate degree throughout 2022 to 2021 to 2022. So in the middle of those 2 years of massive transition, right? And I got to experience myself what, what really blended learning could offer to a diverse group of students. And I think the students I spoke to really shone a light into how a flexible delivery approach to learning can really empower them to study when and where they feel best, as I said earlier. And this is particularly true for disabled students who may have mobility challenges or don't find the campus accessible to them for various reasons. And right, to back this up with, some figures, the Disabled Students UK, which is the student representative body, they did a survey in 2022 that showed that 84.5% of the surveyed disabled students reported that the continuation of online provision and teaching options post-pandemic would be beneficial. I think it's a non-argument point. We know what it can be a lifeline to many students who otherwise would have been excluded entirely. I recall talking to a disabled student from a university speaking about their struggles with going onto campus because it caused them great fatigue. And so traveling onto campus and staying there for hours and waiting in between classes would just worsen their condition over time. And then by the time they returned home, they were just unable to work on their homework assignments further. And, when they're able to access the lecture recordings online, they could rest when they felt unwell, but still be able to refer back to a kind of the material when they're feeling steady and better. And I think it's that flexibility that really awards students this autonomy over their learning, and kind of makes it more accessible to everyone. Not everybody is able to sit through a live lecture, and take handwritten notes for 2 hours and be able to absorb all of that information with full concentration. This way, I think we're starting to think about what engagement looks like. And actually, another case that this brings to mind is from a workshop I attended where a lecturer was talking about these watch parties, right? Where students kind of get together and tune into a live lecture and actively discuss the content, ask each other for help, or clarify things. And in this case, the lecturer was actually worried that their group of international Chinese students weren't actually attending the lectures online. And after reaching out to them and trying to figure out why this was, found that they had troubles listening to the lectures and wanted to share definitions and share notes in real time so they can pause the lecture and ask each other, which isn't possible in a live lecture space. And so when you think about this, to the professor who's looking at a screen, an account, and you can't see anybody's face or the mic is turned off, this may not look like an engaged student. But after finding out the full context, we understand that student engagement and inclusion in education looks very different now. And it's not always visible in the ways that we've been taught student engagement looks like. And it's pushing educators to rethink about what that is, and this rethinking of engagement is always beneficial to making a more inclusive environment where learning doesn't look like any one particular behavior, but manifests in multiple and diverse ways.
And it feels to me that it's always the case that when you make something inclusive, really with a particular group in mind, actually that makes things easier for everybody. And that has to be fantastic because you're improving everybody's, whether it's a user experience, whether it's an inclusive learning pathway. Let's just make things that actually work for real people rather than work for just one group of people.
Absolutely. I'm, just on that, I think I heard someone say about this disabled students that, you can have steps to go up to the lobby of a university building, or you can have a slope. And, a slope is there for, disabled students particularly, but everyone can use it. And that's the point. Why do we not make slopes? And I think that's just the thinking we're trying to push here.
Absolutely, and it's a fantastic example because everyone can visualize that immediately. We all know actually that tackling digital exclusion is incredibly important. We've heard a lot from you, Alyson, on the benefits of doing this. Of course, that's not always that easy to do. So what do you think are some of the most significant barriers to achieving this really comprehensive digital inclusion in higher education today?
And so, we talked already about the consisting, overlasting issues, such as the digital skills gap or access to the internet and, lack of devices. But I think specifically when we're talking about the higher education sector, and I'm sure my colleagues and anybody in the sector would agree, but funding constraints are a huge problem. And this really is important to the digital inclusion agenda because it impacts universities' abilities to invest in funding, in investing in sufficient digital infrastructure, right? And to also keep up with the technological advancements, which always just feel like it's speeding up in pace. And in our section about edtech procurement, which we looked at how do we make sure that universities are procuring and using technologies that have evidence to back their pedagogical value, but also is great for student outcomes. Universities often spend millions of pounds for a product or solution that may not be responsive to the changes or happening in industries or labor markets, and is outdated by the time the student graduates, which is going to be a fundamental problem to solve if the funding constraints just don't improve over time. So yeah, short and sweet, I think that is the number one priority for the sector to really, really focus on.
And how do then institutions really effectively address these issues, particularly around both the digital literacy, but also that equitable access for students to be able to access tech?
And so just on the point of digital literacy, I think it's a funny one because I was actually amazed at how much universities already try to do and provide workshops, skills boot camps. What is it? Like they will try to embed their library services. They want students to come in. They want staff to engage, but the uptake is ridiculously low. And you come to understand, so yes, digital poverty is not just about the access to these opportunities or the availability of these opportunities and devices. It's also about people's willingness and the culture around using digital tech. And so by effectively addressing these issues of how do we improve digital literacy, it starts with, well, what do students want and need? And what do they think? You need to have a regular feedback mechanism to understand what the end user's experience of this tech is to ensure that it's equitable for all. And I think to continue that is a really important point, and it's the very first step in addressing this issue.
And I guess the sort of a natural follow-on there. Where have you seen this done really well, Alyson? What are some of the most successful digital inclusion initiatives that you've seen from your work being implemented in universities?
Yeah, so earlier I mentioned Staffordshire's Digital Inclusion Manifesto, and it includes a couple of initiatives that I think are very worth highlighting. They had the Discover Digital Project, which was supported by the Government Community Renewal Fund, which provided laptops and, on a routine, digital support to students in need. Addressing the first layer, but then the second layer of having a student digital engagement officer, which is a dedicated role to engage students in developing these digital skills with 30 training events and engaging more than 200 students in initial sessions. And that is great. We're trying to say this is the kind of level of engagement that we want to really drive change. And maybe it is about this focal point of support when students have many people to go to, that they're many bodies who are saying, we can help you if you have issues, let us know what it is. But knowing exactly who to go for a very specific issue that they may not be comfortable asking their professors or peers even, I think that is really critical to kind of signposting adequate help. And in the University of Birmingham, for example, they launched this brilliant initiative called the Birmingham Digital Futures, which provided over 600 scholarships to underrepresented groups to enter digital careers through a 24-week part-time program, right? So it's really also about students can look like, when we talk about students, I think we have a propensity to think about undergrad students, 18 to 24, in that sect of life. But in universities, a student does not look like one person. They come from diverse backgrounds, diverse ages, and I think this kind of scholarship and giving people the incentive and opportunity to really explore digital aspects and navigate that is a great initiative to start off with, and what I consider to be successful. But in all, success in digital inclusion is a very subjective thing, right? And I think obviously, these are some of the things that I have thought about in the bottom up stage. So what can we use in terms of like communities and networks? But, sector organizations have also played a huge part in delivering some, big digital inclusion initiatives that are nation spread. So for example, JISC, they've recently extended their EduRoam coverage to deliver Wi-Fi in places that students and staff are commonly at. And it used to be just on campuses, but now it extends to libraries, hospitals, sports grounds, cafes, and so much more. And I just think that those initiatives are great, and we need to continue them. Also, remembering all the bottom up efforts that are equally of value.
And absolutely, I mean, we were talking earlier about this community approach that's needed and how it's so key that there's so many different partners and routes to be able to access digital support. But as you say, we do, when we think of universities and we think of digital inclusion, we're thinking about those quite young people who've gone in through quite a traditional route. There's also, of course, the staff in universities, and let's not forget that actually the university population is not purely students. So how can universities really adopt strategies that will ensure that both students and indeed faculty as well are being equipped with those really essential and necessary digital skills that are going to be so important as we move ever more towards blended learning?
I think we have a section dedicated to staff because it's a short one, but very, very important, I think, because we got to the key issue or the root of the problem, which is, we talked about the availability of training programs for students and staff, but why is the take up so low? Well, during the pandemic, this transition was so sudden and it caused such an exponential increase in workload for faculty, that there was just no time or incentive for them to really innovate on pedagogy or think about all the things that could help them to upskill themselves. It's a weird word to use, upskill, but retrain or whatever it is that they need to really leverage the benefits of tech for teaching purposes. And you know, this workload increase has often come at a cost of professional development, and it's really not embedded. Digital skills programs and workshops aren't embedded into career plans or HR inductions, and they should be. So we should be having these conversations regularly across all departments of what are the minimums or the skills needed for students, I mean for staff particularly, to fully be able to utilize all the equipment and materials that they have access to. And for students, I think it's it the higher education experience is one that takes you on a journey, and I think support throughout this journey is really important. A singular workshop, a singular program, a module will not solve the issue of digital inclusion. And I think there needs to be, you know, there you need to start at the very start of the education journey and all the way throughout the end. And the University of Bristol, which is what I'm thinking about right now, they have this brilliant like pre-arrival course called Digitally Ready, and it really sets the tone for arriving students. Right, it gives an introduction to key resources, digital software, and places to get help and support, all in one place. And students have access to that course at any point throughout their degrees to kind of top up their knowledge, or to engage with whoever they need support from. So I think having little pieces like that throughout the program degrees is really important. And the final point I want to make is the importance of digital skills assessments, right? You can't start to prepare to train people and to train students if you don't know where they are. And our students are diverse. As I said, they have some are using technology in very sophisticated ways, way more than perhaps some of their educators, right? And some are just not they're just not fluent in using technology. So understanding where those gaps are and trying to not just fill the gap, but also try to get peers to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and for students to share their knowledge with each other is really important. And I think a university is a great place and venue to facilitate those things.
And it absolutely follows on from the fact that we all as a society make assumptions that young people know how every possible aspect of technology works, and certainly at the DPA we know it's not the case in primary school, it's not the case in secondary school, it's not the case in sixth form college. So we shouldn't be making those assumptions about students going into university, actually, that they've got the digital confidence and competence to be sometimes doing actually quite difficult and complicated online tasks. You can't have a conversation about digital without talking about AI. It's 2024, it's what most people want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you envisage these emerging technologies, whether that's AI, whether that's anything else that's starting to come through, enhancing blended learning and promoting digital inclusion in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is such an interesting one. Everybody has very polar, very diverse opinions of what AI can do. Lots of fear mongering in the industry. I know with the widespread adoption and public use of ChatGPT, for example, many universities said, okay, if we detect you using AI to any degree, we will mark you down as academic misconduct, and that is the way we're going to do things. That was that for a couple of months, and we now know that is just not going to happen. AI is here, and it's students are using it in droves to hopefully augment their work, right, not substitute. And I think it's great because it levels the playing field in a much more efficient way, right? And then, if we're thinking about, for example, let's say a traditional lecture with a slide deck that is about 20 slides. And maybe a lecturer who's doing this lecture has prepared this format, but wants to translate it into multiple formats, right? AI can do that and generate and convert educational materials into different, video, audio formats very quickly, which assists in helping educators cater to different learning needs and enhancing accessibility for students. And I think that's great, And also it prepares students for this modernized workforce. To not use AI in university and then to graduate places them at a huge disadvantage, right? Where the sector has already adopted many of the tools that maybe they have never used throughout university. And that's a scary thing to think about when you say, oh, the software and the solutions I was adopting throughout my education journey are just not relevant to my life. And we're hearing that a lot from students. So I guess my one big take about how artificial intelligence can enhance blended learning but also promote digital inclusion is, it can make things accessible, and it is efficient, but it also has now pushed people to put a greater emphasis on non-technical, more human-oriented skills like decision making, communication, empathy, these skills that are integral to what we believe we'll get throughout the educational experience, right? And so I would say emerging technologies always at the heart of any governance structure or usage policy is to augment, not substitute, human decision making and labor. And I think that is going to be a key topic that recurs throughout the development of AI policies in universities.
And we do. Oh,
Yeah,
no.
so sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and of course, that looks very different in each university at the moment. We don't tend to see yet that there's anything that's really grown up as the go-to in terms of AI policies. People seem to be working quite separately in the university sector.
Yes, and I think it's because there's no way to predict where this is going to go. This is the worst and the least intelligent AI will ever be. And I think that it scares a lot of people into thinking, like, is this a huge threat to the higher education sector? And in a conference I attended recently at Teesside, the pro vice chancellor, Professor Simpson, actually said, AI is not a threat to higher education or learning, it's a threat to assessment. So we need to think about, is assessment fit for purpose, and what can we do with that? If students are able to plug in their essay questions to an AI program and the assignment to be completed, what were we testing them in the first place? And I think this is it's a great opportunity, again, for educators to rethink about the ways that they approach teaching and learning, and think about what are we really trying to convey to our students throughout their degrees. And something I do want to mention that, I think because there is so much fear mongering, I just want to leave on a kind of positive note about AI. And I think it really can provide highly personalized learning experiences by adapting content and teaching methods. In the report, we talk about this ed tech company called Cadmus, which is an online assessment programs that work with various universities across England and the wider UK. They changed the approach to assessment and feedback. So instead of trying to detect AI-generated content, educators have access to real-time analytics and monitors the progress of a student's development of any given task. So it can help students stay engaged, or actually encourages them to stay engaged with their assignments, and also receive detailed, tailored support that they need to do well in class. And so with any tech disruptors, they've been able to instigate the sector-wide conversation on how do we approach some of the fundamentals of higher education delivery, like assessment, lectures, and seminars.
And there's so many principles, it feels like, here that need to be adopted. And if we look back over really just the last very few years, we saw the rise of the smartphone. People didn't really know that was going to happen. Probably you did if you were a Tech Horizon scanner, but most of us didn't know that was going to happen. We had the iPod was ancient history in no time, but at one point that was the big new thing. The pandemic drove that pace of technical change incredibly fast. Then we've seen ChatGPT and other generative AI programs are available. But how can institutions prepare for whatever's coming next? Because I think most of us don't know what that's going to be. What are the techniques people are using to future-proof those blended learning programs, make sure that they stay inclusive, but also that they are adaptable to future tech change?
Yeah, I think something that there's many things that I've already mentioned that are range from short-term to long-term goals, but one that I think is so integral to this entire puzzle coming together is strategic oversight and senior leadership buy-in of digital inclusion as a priority, right? It really matters to for someone to foster that culture of understanding innovation as an exciting thing, as a good thing, to foster an inclusive and accessible learning environment and understand that that looks different for many different disciplines and contexts, I think is the starting step. Because once you have that foundation, it's very hard to future proof something you can't predict, but you can have the skills and the necessary tools to navigate whatever change does come your way. And to have an agile and more flexible system, you need to understand that things may not always look in the traditional forms, in the traditional sense of the word education, but it's still valid and it's still legitimate as a proper way of engaging our students. And having that mentality, I think, is an important step.
Fantastic. Thank you,
No,
Alyson.
thank you.
Quite a bit of ground there.
Yeah.
We've got some questions coming in from our audience. If you've got a question and you haven't asked it yet, do use that Q&A button, put it in there, and we will try and get to it. The first one that I want to come to actually is an observation from Dora that a lot of the times students might actually not know about the support that's available in universities. And this is something we've heard as well. There may be somebody doing digital inclusion, but if you don't know about that, or if the signposting is only online, how do you get that word out there? Have you seen any universities just doing that staggeringly well that other universities could be looking to emulate?
In terms of, sorry, I got sidetracked. I was reading the comments. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. Would you be able to repeat the question? My apologies.
I guess boiling it down, how can universities really work hard to make sure that anyone in the student body knows that support is available and it's not sort of signposted one place on a notice board and then a few places on a internal intranet? Actually, that everyone is living and breathing that digital inclusion need and knows where to go for help if they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important or the most well-regarded initiative from students themselves is this idea of this induction module, right? Something that is maybe compulsory but not weighted, but a way to ease that transition into this university context, especially for international students who may have never come across some of the platforms that are being used here, right? So there's one part of making sure that it starts pre-arrival. That is actually at the point where students maybe feel the most excited about the course in terms of they're doing this, implementing this new change in their lives, and there's a lot of information to go through. So centralizing that in one place is really good. I think of, as I mentioned earlier, University of Bristol's kind of their induction, digitally ready induction course, but also at UCL, which is another university who does this quite well. They have a central repository called the UCL Resource Wiki, where they have access to every single workshop, every single kind of like online tutoring session, places to get support, the software needed in different classes, what students have access through their educational emails, like all of this just in one wiki. And I think that's so great because students, they're not having multiple tabs open to try and figure out which is the best tutoring program. They want to see it in one place. And I think that's a really key thing to note. I think those instances work really well just because of how the students respond to those. And it's really also about trying. Just because it works in one context doesn't mean it will work in another. So, for a much more intimate university where there's a smaller number of students in a class, maybe it's easier to do some of this, like the community building and sharing of practice and peer-to-peer learning than it would be for maybe a business course with 300 students. It's very different. So I think understanding and assessing, identifying what the students actually need and what they respond well to is critical.
Fantastic. I love that you started that with what students have told you rather than just what experts have told you. I guess really following on, and it links into this awareness building and this best practice. How much of the best practice that you've seen is really being shared across the UK? And what is the mechanism for that? Our anonymous attendee adds, "We don't know what we don't know." And I think that's so important because in a university setting, even if you don't know what the question is to ask around how to do digital inclusion well, you're never going to get to the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, this is very institutionally driven. If somebody isn't there to care about this, to push this agenda forward, it might not become a priority. And
Mm.
so we see this with, a lot of I was talking about Staffordshire and their digital inclusion manifesto. That started out as a group of people who really genuinely cared about the way that students are engaging with tech, right? So, in terms of sharing practice, it's just been about people putting it into the ether and the internet and LinkedIn and wherever to say, this is what we're doing, and our students are really benefiting from this. But there isn't a compilation, perhaps, or places to share that information or log that information for all to share. I think sector organizations are really, really pushing this to engage a wider range of people. For example, JISC and UCISA, they have working groups that meet together to talk about digital practice. And oftentimes, those focus around senior leadership, which means that they're closed doors. Maybe educators aren't participating. Maybe the subject specialists aren't participating in those discussions. They are happening. I would say the best start is that to share practice, and I've seen this in, for example, Warwick's manufacturing group in University of Warwick, where there is this huge appetite to share some of the great things that they've been doing with their students, and it's always done through academic papers. Like, I've done this initiative with these students and it worked really well. It takes 2 years to publish, and by the time it's out, it's maybe the pilot's not running anymore, and this is a frequent issue, right? We need to create more spaces to link people together to talk about their practice at a much less senior level, right? Junior assistants and junior teaching staff are also incredibly important in this conversation, as well as students who oftentimes aren't even consulted in how they're taught and things like that. I think so. In terms of, just to wrap up my answer, because I think I said a bunch of things there, to note the sector organizations, so UCISA, JISC, and the Association for Learning Technology. And then they're really good. They hold webinars such as this one, but also workshops for those who want to get to know more about other people's practice. And I would just say, also, as educators, you just have to put yourself out there. You need to attend these workshops and meet people who are doing such amazing things. And I'm sure that conferences also are a good place to do that. But just putting yourself out there and learning what other people are doing is a good step.
And actually, that point around really thinking about junior colleagues within universities ties into something that Fee Williams has highlighted, which is that PhD students will often have real financial challenges and are often teaching students without the benefits of that formal teaching contract or equipment. So recognizing that crossover, that Venn diagram, must be incredibly important in looking to tackle the digital divide there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think PhD students are often this weird mix of being a student, but also a professional teaching staff. So the support may be even more fragmented in those key areas, for those key groups. And I think, that's why we need this strategic level of oversight, because you need a consistent and cohesive strategy to affect everybody in the institution, not just particular groups or not just particular departments, just because they lean towards, a more technologically savvy curriculum or learning design, right? Like STEM subjects, you need to level up every single institution and have someone driving that.
Absolutely. And we have a couple of sort of really practical questions actually from Jess at Essex. For one, buying a device can be an absolute minefield, and there is potentially a bit of a divide between being universities or indeed individuals being oversold to try and meet those commission targets versus actually needing to know what's the basic of what's needed for every course. And she says you don't need max for a business degree, for example, you need the right bit of kit. What's the answer to that? What approaches the university's taking to make sure that people have what they need, not something super flashy that might sound good but doesn't actually meet that basic need?
Right. I think, you know, especially for subject specialists, kind of knowledge or disciplinary information that you need to use tools, as you say, you know, you don't need SPSS for marketing. I don't know. And I think, you know, this idea comes from, well, the educator really, or the course convener needs to communicate this adequately to their students, right? So a lot of what I see happening across the sector is that there are initiatives, digital initiatives, or the central resource, as I talked about earlier, or you know, the induction modules, whatnot. And many professors may not be aware of those things happening, right? So it's this, you know, there needs to be an institution-wide communication of what is going on and what is out there so that they can benefit from it. And then it's really the educator's role and can be a really important person in steering students to, well, I know this subject and I know this discipline really well, and these are the tools that have really helped me excel and succeed in this area, and translate that to students. Because you know there's so many you know products and solutions out there. I think it's very difficult to say, you know, which one is good, and you may spend ages trying to navigate what works for you and end up not realizing you didn't need it in the first place. So ensuring that educators are aware of what tech they're going to use and what they expect students to use, and making sure that they do communicate this with, whether it be in a module checkbook or like the program information sheet that's given out at the start, to really say that from the get-go and have that in writing.
Feels like it would sit on the same sheet with the essential reading for the course. Feels like it's almost like a student needs to know everything that they might need for their program
Yeah,
study.
absolutely. And, you know, I mean, this is just one minor point, but there is something about the educators do so much for their students that is just really not spelt out. And oftentimes students just don't have the vocabulary to talk about what they've gained out of this class, right? So I think when a teacher or lecturer or professor is able to say, you know, through this course, you've used this, you know, this program to analyze content, to, you know, engage your critical thinking skills, and to communicate your ideas to your peers. Those things are all very useful for students in the modern workplace, right? They are transferable skills. But because those things are readily not communicated to the students, they often leave and say, I don't know what the point of that module was, or I thought it was fine, or it was great, but I don't know what I got out of it. Well, you got out a lot. I think it's just about practicing saying that and knowing what to say.
It's such a good point. Actually, people don't necessarily always have the words to express or indeed understand in their own mind exactly what the benefit has been in terms of their own growth. And a final, and again, really practical question from Jess, which is around circular economy. So certainly we at the DPA, we see a huge amount of benefit from refurbished machines. It doesn't always have to be the latest model that gets you online. So Jess asks, do HE institutions have residual value contracts or anything similar that help with that circular economy? So enabling older devices to be refurbished or recycled, resold, to create that value back to purchase newer tech, and I would add, or even to donate to students who may really be able to benefit from that existing equipment.
Yes, I know that the preferred kind of method in for universities is device loans, right? So you give out laptops and you give them to students for a set period of time, maybe even during the holidays, and then you get them back when they finish with their program. I think this has been the preferred. I personally don't have any information on residual value contracts, but this is something that you know, we are looking into in Policy Connect, as e-waste is a growing concern for us. and we want to figure out how to tackle this issue on multiple sectors, and to also ensure that we can really benefit from the circular economy and reusing a lot of tech that doesn't need to be thrown away. You know, we don't always need the newest laptop or the newest phone. And I think, yeah, that's what I would say to that. I know that procurement of tech in specific, and if this is what we're talking about, is a very arduous and resource intensive process, right? So I'm sure there are certain barriers to preventing universities from repurchasing or using used tech, but I'll get back to you on this, Jess, and we'll follow up, because I think this is a great, interesting question and something I'm interested in as well.
Amazing. Thank you again, Alyson. Thank you to everyone who has joined us on this call today. If you're watching this later, I hope you found it as insightful as we have today as well. If you like what we do at the DPA, let me leave you with some calls to action, some homework, as it were, for you to go away and do this afternoon. Do visit digitalpovertyalliance.org, all one word. You can read more about our national delivery plan. This includes our 6 missions towards ending digital poverty in the UK once and for all, including facets you would expect: raising awareness, affordability, skills, and so much more. If you work at an organisation, do take a look at our Charter for Digital Inclusion. We are really keen for organisations, big and small, up and down the UK, to be signing up to make pledges committing action on digital poverty. We've already got businesses, we've got local authorities, we've got universities signing up to this. Sign up, get your badge. Who doesn't want a badge for your website? So do check that out. And if you are at an organisation that is in a position to consider donating old devices, or even to think about partnership and funding, please, again, do reach out, do get in touch. We'd love to have those conversations. Once again, a big thank you to Alyson, and in just a second I'm going to come to you and see if you've got a final closing thought to leave everybody with as we say goodbye for today. Other than that, please do watch out on the DPA social feeds for our next webinars that will be coming up in the next few weeks. And don't forget, it is End Digital Poverty Day on the 12th of September. It's the 2nd year that the DPA has been running that. You can find much more information in our communications and fundraising pack. So do think what your institution could do on the 12th of September, whether that's running a webinar, whether it's having some flyers out, whether it's doing social media posts, or running a fundraising event. We would love to hear how you would like to get involved in that. But Alyson, closing thoughts from you.
Yeah, I guess just to thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this opportunity. I had a great time. It was my pleasure to talk about some of the things about at Policy Connect for the last year. And for those who want to continue the conversation further with me, I've popped my email in the chat, so please feel free to contact me at any point. But yeah, I guess, of course, echoing everything Elizabeth said about ending Digital Poverty Day and ensuring that people just continue spreading the message that this is a priority for us to all work towards. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Alyson. Thank you, everyone. See you soon. Take care.
Take it. Bye.